In a galaxy flooded with content, creativity has become a casualty. But the storytellers, they're rising again. It's 2025. AI can write your campaign, design your carousel, and test 20 variations before you've even finished your first coffee. The algorithms, they don't just recommend the content, they're becoming the content. But something's missing: the uniquely human, the weird, the part that doesn't scale, but sticks. Because when everything starts to sound the same, the ones who still know how to tell a story, they become the rebellion. Welcome to episode 50 of the Creative Ops podcast. Not just a milestone, this one's the rebellion. Today, I'm joined by David Granger, former journalist, Red Bull storytelling lead, and now co founder of content studio Arc and Foundry. Together, we're going full trilogy, the original, from A New Hope to The Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi. We're mapping the fall of storytelling in the algorithm age and the return of the narrative craft that brands actually need. Because in the fight between noise and meaning, story is the mission, and the rebellion starts now. David Granger, welcome to the Creative Ops Podcast. So great to have you on today.
Thanks very much, Nish. Thank you for the invitation and for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. I first, found out about you. You were on stage at the Henry Stewart Creative Ops Conference in London 3 months ago now. I think it's June 6th. We're recording this on, and you were on a panel, sort of talking about creativity today, and sort of what is creativity and things like that. And I couldn't help myself. I had to interject myself from the audience into the discussion happening on stage. But it was great to have that back and forth. You and I ended up having an offline discussion. And I found out about your very fascinating background. So you've been in places like Red Bull, which everyone, even if they're not consumers of the beverage, has no doubt heard about, and the great storytelling they do. I found out you've got this journalism background. And then you and I both found out that we're both fans of Star Wars. And if you're listening and not watching to this on YouTube, I'll tell you that Dave and I are both old enough to have seen the original Star Wars in the theaters. We still look great for our age, though. Still look great
Exactly.
for our age.
Yeah.
And we thought it would be fun to just sort of have a conversation about, like, partially about like your history with journalism and sort of narrative storytelling, as you call it, and sort of use the original Star Wars trilogy as a backdrop, like The Force Awakens, The Empire Strikes Back, and then The Return of the Jedi. So we're sort of going to go through your background, where brand and storytelling has been over the last 20 years, where it is today, and where it might be going forward as we move from this age of like algorithms to this age of AI. So, with that being said, David, there's a lot for us to unpack here. Where I'd like to start with is, let's start with A New Hope, the first Star
Okay.
Wars movie.
Yeah.
And let's talk about journalism, creativity, and the rise of what you call narrative marketing. So, and you did your formal training, and I think the early parts of your career, if I remember correctly, in journalism. So, how did that sort of background carry into this idea of like brand storytelling or narrative marketing? Let's start
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I started as a journalist. I came out of university and I was looking for a job, a direction. And what I was passionate about was music. So I used to go to a lot of gigs of band and watch bands, and I used to submit these reviews to the local paper just to kind of, I don't know, it was for no other reason than I enjoyed the writing, and I kind of guessed what I wanted to do was be a music journalist. That's probably my unrequited métier. And I submitted these reviews, some of which I still have, some of which are still readable, and they asked me to come and do work experience at a local paper. So it was a tiny newspaper in a small market town in the middle of England, But what I absolutely loved it. It was just, it kind of, everything that we did, whether it was court cases involving violent crime, whether it was charity work, whether it was someone's lost dog, whether it was someone appealing for donations, everything. It was all kind of, there was a microcosm of human life there, all age groups, because this was pre-internet. So the only way of communicating basically was via this local newspaper. And I just kind of got it. I liked it. I liked the deadlines. I liked the fact we used to go for a couple of pints on Wednesdays after we put the paper to bed. It was just a really good place to learn how to tell stories. I then went and trained, and they throw you into a city and give you 6 months to learn how to write stories. But not just write stories, how to find stories, how you talk to the people who are involved, and then you write them and check them. And it was that really. I just loved all that kind of that storytelling. And if you got it wrong, you were told in no uncertain terms when the paper came out. If you got it right, it was good for everyone. So that, if anything, through my kind of slightly disparate career, it's been that which has held true. That's the thread which I can see going running through it. Whether it was local newspapers, whether it was motorcycle journalism, whether it was social media, whether it was Formula One, the Red Bulletin that I worked in for, that was my first job at Red Bull, was a magazine. It was a Formula One magazine. All of it was finding and telling stories. And then what we've done today, so kind of forward 25, 30 years, um, as an agency, we call ourselves a content marketing agency because our specialism is finding the story within a brand, telling it and giving it context, and then giving it to the consumers and potential clients. So that's, I think that storytelling, when it came into marketing, people were very, they kind of, it was a new buzzword. It was kind of, we're telling stories, we've got a narrative, we've got human empathy. But sometimes that's not always what they're doing. They're just branding marketing as storytelling. But for me, it's always been, I don't have a formal marketing training. I don't have a degree in marketing. I don't have a mini MBA in marketing. The only thing I have is that journalism training, which is, it's stood me in good stead so far. But it's always been about telling stories.
Yeah, a lot of what you're saying sort of, well, a number of things ran through my head. One is like just how familiar it sounds to like sort of the lived marketing experience of you've got to go find the story, you've got to dig for it. You're still working on deadlines, like you've got to ship, which will sound very familiar to marketers who might be listening, and certainly to creative operations leaders who are the majority of the audience. And let's stick on sort of New Hope and narrative marketing and brand storytelling for a bit, and just sort of talk to me a little bit about like how would that then sort of get reflected in the way you approach briefs, whether you're the one writing the brief or you're the one receiving a brief. Like, how does
Yeah.
that storytelling mindset like get applied to briefs?
I think in terms of, and I've thought a lot about storytelling because I think it's a slight cliche at the moment. It's, and it has been for several years, and you have to be careful that what you're saying, as again, is not just a piece of marketing content. And what I think is, there's two things. It's context, and context is everything in terms of storytelling. So if I tell you that I'm going to have steak and chips for tea, you kind of go, I really don't care. If Paul McCartney says that, then suddenly it's a story because he's an avowed vegetarian. He's someone who's not eaten meat for a long time. So it's context. It's the same sentence coming out of the same language, but that context changes everything. So when it comes to briefs, what we try and do is to find why people are doing things and what has made them do it. So in Red Bull's case, at the Red Bulletin, um, which was a Formula One magazine, but we just told stories about people in the paddock. We talked a lot about backstory. So how did journalists or photographers get to be in the F1 paddock? What's the backstory of a driver? Why has a sponsor decided to invest in the sport? All these things. So a lot of it is context. So when it comes to briefs, it's making sure that people understand that that's the nugget of information you need, and making sure that that runs through everything. It's not just sticking a camera in front of a person or an object and hoping that becomes content. It's giving it a bit of context. And so when we brief videographers or writers or photographers, we remind them of the audience, of how they're telling that story, and exactly why they're telling that story as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a lot about context, and it's a lot about kind of reminding people about story.
Yeah, that word context is somewhat ironic because we're going to talk a bit about AI today a little bit later
Yeah,
when we talk about, this sort of gray period we're in now between maybe the Empire Strikes Back and algorithms, and sort of will we just sort of tip over into AI shaping all narratives, or will will the storyteller Jedi's return? And I do want to get into like what is storytelling, because I think it's become sort of the synergy in terms of a term of the creative world. Like, yeah, let's go and MBA guys are always saying, let's create synergy. Nobody uses the word anymore because it's been so ridiculed. And I think in the creative world, it's like, we need storytelling. And do you have storytelling? Like, let's slot it in as part of the project plan.
yeah. And I think the trouble is that when you say, we need storytelling, people go away and shoot a small piece of video, or they do something behind the scenes, or they write a caption for a social post, and that's not what I think of storytelling. That's just creating content. And I work with a guy, David Parker, and he used to have a phrase that said there's a difference between content marketing and marketing content. And marketing content is the very functional. It's got no soul to it. It's a catalog, or it's a call to action. Whereas content marketing has a little more empathy to it. It should have a story structure to it, and it resonates with people, and it will stay with them longer. So I think that was always a neat way of doing it, with difference between content marketing, which is what we do, telling stories about brands, and marketing content, which is just copywriting. And I think, without kind of jumping the gun, I think that's where AI will be fantastic in creating marketing content. The content marketing piece still needs, at the moment, it still definitely needs a human element to bring it to life.
Yeah, you're bang on. And just sort of going back to the idea of the brief and finding the story, it's sort of like that. It's that space where you almost have to find the weird about the situation and the human, right? And you're making me think, like, should briefs, like really good briefs, and I don't mean for the transactional stuff, like I need a
Yeah,
landing page, but I mean a brief for a campaign or a product launch, or for things that are big and strategic in nature. Should there be a question on there going like, what is like very like humanly weird about
yeah,
the person, the product, the people using the service or the product? It's because that's where the stories usually are, right? It's the weird.
100%. And that's so, we talk about thumb stopping content, and another hackneyed phrase, but it's true. How do you stop people in the feed? And people do it in different ways, but you're right, it's the weird. So it is, and that's why when we get to algorithms, that's kind of the weird, is you go straight to that. And I think as marketers, sometimes we don't do that. We tend to be a bit more bland, and we're not aggressive, not aggressive. Aggressive enough with clients to say to them, tell us what is different about you. Don't give us the spiel that comes out on your website. Tell us a bit more about you, your story, what your product, why is it different? And you're right, whether that's weird, whether that's idiosyncratic, whether that's a point of differentiation, it's just a way of getting to just a bit more of the soul of the brand, rather than just bland jargon, which anyone and chat GPT can spurt out at any given moment.
Yeah. So going back to your journalism background, and you were formerly, you had some schooling in it, and others who grew up in that same era came with that same ethos, either into the media world or and into the marketing world as well. And it felt different because it was rooted in storytelling. Um, So before we sort of go on to talk about algorithms and AI, like what's your current perspective on like there's a couple of things I've noted. One is media itself has changed a lot where it's starting to feel more and more like marketing, right? Like surface level and
Yeah.
not looking for the story. It's just looking to, maybe stop people in the scroll or get their attention for 20 minutes on, CNN or BBC or whatever it is. Um, and and also it's so like marketing has changed but I'm also seeing a lot of brands today build in-house media teams. Do you and they're bringing in like quote unquote media people to do that, right? To be the
Yeah.
face or behind the scenes like media producers and things like that. But are they coming to it with the same sort of like journalistic ethos that you and the people that you grew up around with and came up with brought into the media and the marketing industries, or do you also see that as being dramatically different? Like, I'm just really
Yeah.
keen to better understand these in-house media teams that are like scaling up quickly.
I think the only, well, no, not the only problem. A problem with bringing media people in house is that they're less likely to challenge the status quo. And so what you have is they're trying to find consensus with their chief marketing officer, their chief financial officer, their CEO. And so they're trying to find that. Whereas I think sometimes if you come in with a fresh perspective, you can find those stories or those differentiations or those the weird bits. But that would be my question to those people coming in house. And I've worked the majority of my life was working in house, whether it was Red Bull, whether it was newspapers, whether it was Cinch. It wasn't as an in-house marketer, and you can come up with great ideas, you can come up with great campaigns, but if for some reason the CEO or the CFO's nephew doesn't like it, then it's squashed, and that's when there's no challenge to that marketing. There's no kind of looking for differentiation. So I think that would be the one concern is making sure that there's enough perspective that you can see what's going on, and making sure that you're bringing a different perspective, which is what we try and do with our clients. Is we work for Beta Tools, which is an Italian tool company. On the surface, that doesn't have a great deal of narrative, but what we've done is found amazing stories about people using them, and we tell those stories rather than tell the tools story, if that makes sense. So it's about the human interaction and their usage as opposed to the product itself. So, and I can imagine an in-house team, you write your press release, you do your video campaign, it goes to the CEO and he goes, well, I just don't like that. It doesn't work. It's not what I want the company to be, how I want the company to be represented. So I think that sometimes the perspective is one we can do.
Do you have is going a bit off topic, but again, sort of pulling on the journalism thread, just looking at journalism today in all its forms, paper, digital, television, so on and so forth. Do you think journalism has also changed? Like it certainly has changed dramatically, but
Yeah.
like have they lost the storytelling ethos or DNA?
Yeah, and I mean, I think certainly in the UK, it's you can see that people are they're putting up either data or they're putting up examples and hoping that the press and the TV will take it on board and challenge it. And that's been in politics for a good 10 years in the UK. And I think it's partly to do with Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian, who said
Yep.
the medium is the message. I didn't understand that until I started digging deeper and thinking about how 24-hour news, if you're to fill that channel with news, not everything is going to be not everything is going to be good news, not everything is going to be a great story, but you're just going to have to find something to fill all that TV time. And then when it 24-hour uh, internet came along, that's even more space, that's unlimited space that you have to fill. So occasionally, probably more often than not, the quality of those stories just drops because not every Sunday night is going to be full of amazing stories. So it has definitely changed, and going back to McLuhan, the message has changed because of the medium it's produced on, which is a real shame for good old journalism.
It is, and for good old marketing, and it's a good segue into where I'd like to move next. And I might go on a bit of a 1-2 minute rant here, but I think storytelling is so important, and it's become so diluted over the last couple of decades because of the medium. And I'll get to that in a moment. But storytelling to me is so important because I think it's the original algorithm. Like, and those who listen to the podcast have heard me go on about this, so they might just be rolling their eyes, going, "Not again." But I think it's that important to say that they are the original algorithms. It's what we, sat around the campfire and we told each other stories of the past, the present, and most importantly, stories of the future. Because those stories of the future were the possibilities of the tomorrow we could create. And what I've seen happen, especially over the last 10, 15 years, as we become increasingly like a digital first society, and I'm not advocating for becoming Luddites or like adopting the Amish way of life or anything like that. But it's gone from storytelling where we can root ourselves in the emotional narrative of where were we, where are we, and where can I go, where, and most importantly, where can we go together over time. And it seems like the medium today is marketing manipulation, and it's short term versus like long term. So like I think true storytelling and brands that are truly committed to it think in longer periods of time than just today, this week, this quarter, this fiscal year. They've got a sense of their stories infused with a sense of purpose, and it could be tools, but it's really about what do these tools allow our customers to do? What are they building with it? What are they maintaining with it? Um, and I just find like a lot of what we've done as the algorithms have become very convenient and efficient at maximizing short-term returns, which is what the system has become incentivized for. It's marketing manipulation is really what it is versus storytelling. Or am I being a pessimistic Canadian, which I'm not, but maybe I'm sounding like it in the moment.
No, I don't think you are, and I think it's. I was always. It was when people used to come to me and say, what, let's look at what's trending and jump on that. And I thought, well, that's a backward way of looking at it. I understand, as as you rightly point out, that algorithm and now dictates how brands manifest themselves. And I always used to get cross because there are certain bands that I love, but clearly their social media is written by people who don't understand the music or their audience. They're written by people who haven't perhaps grown up with that music, and I think that's what some of the brands are doing. You can see that TikTok is, and probably not now actually, but TikTok 6 months ago was very much, we need to have it. It's exploding. You get in front of millions of people. How can we get on it? Rather than thinking, what can I give my audience, my customers, my clients via TikTok? They've said, right, we need a TikTok channel. Let's fill it with stuff which has our brand on it. And that's the wrong way to do things. That's being slaves to the algorithms as opposed to slave to your brand story, which is what you should be. You should absolutely be. Everything should be. And so, just looking at the hashtag trends on TikTok, that's you'll get views, but there won't be people that are going to buy your product or your service at the end of the day. They'll know who you are.
Or maybe they will, but it'll be a short-term thing, right? Like that sort of it's a transactional relationship uh, with the buyer. They're no longer a customer, they're just a buyer. They're today's buyer.
Yeah,
And maybe if they see something that appeals to their in the moment need, like in 6 months, maybe they'll buy something again. But it seems like we've gone to becoming a much more like individualistic trend. Like I guess that's part of it. It's like the culture in which we inhabit. Like it's more individualistic, it's more transactional, it's more like me based versus we based. Um, it's like that is also shaping all this. Like all these things haven't happened in a vacuum. They're all feeding off each other, it seems like.
Yeah, yeah, and the irony is that brands keep talking about wanting to have fans and communities around them, but they're not really doing anything to engender that, apart from trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And so your content becomes, how can I grab people's attention now? What's going to make me part of that conversation, as opposed to making sure that they're true to their brand story again. And I'll keep going back to that, I guess.
Yeah, I wonder if like I mean, one of the biggest barriers to going back to storytelling, I imagine, is that the right incentives aren't in place for the executives. Like they're incentivized on this quarter, this fiscal year. Like everybody talks about the long term and wanting to be one of those great companies and brands that will be around for 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years. But all the incentive systems are set up for now, or set up for me and not we.
Yeah, and I think that's why I feel, the more I think about it, the more I feel fortunate to have been at Red Bull at that time. So when the Red Bulletin was, it was a magazine printed on a mobile press. So we used to take a printing press to all, it was 18 races in those days. And literally we would take a printing press round to each of these races. The side, it was on the back of a lorry. The side of these lorries would open up, and that would be our offices. And when we started in 2005, the only people that we gave that magazine to, and it came out 4 times every race weekend, were the people who worked in Formula One. So it didn't go to the public. You couldn't buy it. You had to be part of that kind of inner circle to get this magazine. And it must have cost quite a lot of money to send. I think there were 15 of us that used to go around the world writing and printing this magazine. But that had, what it did was, and this is what, Mr. Matschitz, who one of the founders of Red Bull, his genius was knowing that the aspirational and scarcity was a real pull
Yeah.
in terms of human nature. So these magazines are still, you can find them on eBay, and they're still, that's my son's inheritance up in the loft, is the back catalogue of magazines. But he did it. And what he said was, it just goes to the people who work in F1. So, but people outside found out about it and wanted to buy it. And then when we did release it, it was like the floodgates opened, and it was like suddenly they had access to this magazine. And it was a magazine at the start of the internet. So print was apparently dying, but we still were something that people wanted. So there was aspirational, and people had to have it. So it is, um, it's about that long termism. That wasn't just, we did it for 3, 4 seasons. That's 4 years it took to build up that momentum, and that's not what's happening, I don't think, now, when you can chuck out digital content at you flick on Canva and suddenly you've got a campaign.
Yeah, suddenly you have a campaign, you can scale it to infinity and move at the speed of light. And I think Red Bull is, I wonder if in 10 years, if you and I came back and had a chat, like, would, is Red Bull sort of going to be in this like marketing museum of like, this is some, like, sort of like the dinosaurs of, this is what we're able to do during that era. But like, I guess what I'm trying
Yeah,
to
yeah.
ask is, could a Red Bull with that approach, is that still possible today? Is that maybe like liquid death today, or um, is Red Bull possible in today's environment?
I think it is, but what Mr. Matschitz, again, the bravery he had was to invest so much of Red Bull's profit in content marketing. So there's very, very little, traditional advertising. There's some cartoons that go on the telly. There's a couple of posters, but the majority of it is putting the Red Bull logo on athletes, musicians, and artists, and letting them tell the story of the brand. And that could be anything. That could be racing cars. That could be aeroplanes, that could be runners, that could be football teams, but all they have that kind of central theme of, this is Red Bull, we're dedicated, and those brand values come through in every time they choose an ambassador. They have to kind of go through that filter. So, sorry, to answer your question, I think they could, but it's whether any brand has the almost the permission from either its founders or its backers to just tell stories, to set up a media house, to set up 3 media houses around the world and just tell stories. And I think that's the difference. Is that if you Nike did it something very similar. Adidas did something very similar. Some of the football teams in Italy have they call them media houses, but they're just kind of production houses rather than going all out for just telling the story of that brand. And I think I don't think it will be a dinosaur in 10 years. It's been going over 30 years now, Red Bull, and the momentum is still there. People still associate it with some very fast cars, some very cool athletes, some very cool musicians. So yeah, I hope I'm not proved wrong on that point.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say they, as a brand, will be a dinosaur. I mean that origin story. Like, will that be something that we look back on and it just doesn't happen? And you used a word that I think is very important to sort of like dive into a little bit is courage. And so going back to like our Star Wars arc here, like it feels like we've been in this. So you and the other like narrative storytellers grew up in this rich era, and I don't mean to like apply nostalgia to a previous era, and it was all like sunshine. It wasn't, but storytelling was much more prevalent. It was in the driver's seat, as I say. People like even like David Ogilvy and some of the greatest ad people that we've known. And we're in this Empire Strikes Back era, let's call it, for the last 10 years, where
Yeah,
and the CMOs is where it feels like marketing has sort of become just this battalion of stormtroopers, and everyone is just bowing down to I don't know like who Darth Vader is in this, but we'll just say generically the algorithms of
yeah,
the online platforms. And the CMO, I think, has a like the CMO to me is key, because a lot of what I think about these days when I think about CMOs is it's the most confused executive role there is. They don't know what they are anymore. And they're always bemoaning, like, our average tenure is 18 months. And it's because, like, just look at what has happened. We've gone from storytelling to, you know, chief algorithm officers. They're not marketing officers. It's not about the stories and the brands. And I think they've lost the narrative of what marketing is.
yeah. And I think that's a real shame, because if you get to that point in your career where you have worked your way up to be a CMO, to then be beholden to, are we going with the Emperor or Darth Vader? I don't know. One of those people on the board that tells you, it is just about the bottom line, or it's just about, uh, your monthly figures as opposed to your quarterly or your 6 monthly figures. That's an awful place to be, because your creatives are, if they're true creatives, they want to get stuck in and they want to kind of push the boundaries and work out what they can do within those brand guidelines. So that's coming at you from below, and then above you, you've got your CFO and your CEO who is saying, don't spend any more money, don't invest any more money, because we need to see the bottom line this month or this week. And I've seen it, and it's an awful place to be. And it should be the best role in the world, because you should be able to say, these are my brand guidelines. I'm going to go and create some amazing campaigns which get people either engaged, entertained, or informed about my brand and my service. But I think they probably are not, and it's because of part of that, the speed of production as well. Whereas if you've got an outdoor campaign, if you've got a poster campaign, you have to spend a long time working out who your clients are, which buses they're going to take, so you've got the posters in the right place, what's going to resonate with them, and then you have it printed and posted. Even that now is now digitally done, so it's an LED screen, so you can change it at the touch of a button. So there's less necessity to prepare for production, and so you can just do it instantaneously, and that kind of takes a lot of the creativity out of it, because it will just be, well, let's A/B test another series of adverts rather than do something with a 6 month campaign.
That's really interesting. You're almost making me think. And I'll before I say this, I'll preface this by saying I myself am a type 2 diabetic, so I can certainly
Right.
empathize with this. But It sort of feels like the Ozempification of marketing. And what ends up happening is that I was listening to this podcast, the Rich Roll podcast, and there was this. I think he's a Brit, Johan Hari, who was on the podcast, and he's an investigative journalist, and he was talking to this guy, Rich Roll, and Johan Hari himself has used Ozempic, and Rich Roll was like, but are you giving up like earning lifestyle changes and just the journey, and what do you give up learning about yourself and about nutrition and fitness and things like that? And they both had good points. Johan Hari said, if the house is on fire, you don't stand outside and go, oh, we should have put in some better sprinklers or something like that. You send the firefighters in, and that's what Ozempic can be in the short term. Like, so sure, take the injection and send your campaigns out the door because you still have to meet the objectives of the quarter and the fiscal year. And Rich Roll's also right. Like, you can't totally give everything up to the easy button, to the Ozempic shot. Because, as you said, and the reason I'm thinking about this is because it has become easier and easier and easier, and the algorithms are moving faster, and the data's coming in, and we could just react almost. Well, now we can react in real time. Like, marketing is like has been moving towards and is not that far behind the way like financial markets work, where it's not humans doing it, it's just algorithms because it moves so quickly.
Yeah,
And but what are we giving up in the process? So if you just take Ozempic and nothing else, do you ever learn what good fitness is, what healthy eating
yeah,
is? And in the marketing world, you just made me think like, yes, it seems so obvious, but you said it out loud. And it's like, are you giving up your creative muscles?
yeah. And that's, I think anyone who came into this industry with any kind of creative bent is it is that, no, it's not an artistic struggle, but it's the joy of getting something written, of having something printed, of seeing your work out in the open. Whereas if you and Canva is a tool that used it in some of my teams. ChatGPT is an amazing tool. But if you haven't been through that, and that's why I consider myself really lucky. I'm not a digital native. I'm a digital immigrant, or yeah, I guess. But I like the fact that I went from analog to digital because I know about waiting for presses to get to roll, waiting for the papers to be delivered. Whereas now, if I can do it on ChatGPT, and I can automate the whole thing. So I could prompt, write, publish, and get a reaction in one press of a button. I can get the whole technology chain to work it for me. And that struggle that you talk about, eating less fatty food and going for a few more runs rather than injecting itself, is sometimes that's the bit that where you will find the weird, or you'll find the strange, or you'll find the story. And again, as people who create, we like the process as much as the product, and that's part of what we do. So yeah, I I would call the fire brigade if necessary, but
Yep.
also sometimes it's nice to work out whether I should have put anti-inflammatory insulation in my roof as well. That
Yeah,
was a heck of a
exactly.
metaphor, Nish. Thank you.
It's God, you're making me think about so many things. It's and I because you have to earn your creativity, right? And you have to keep building that capability. It's what I'm seeing a lot of people struggle with these days with writing. Like, to me, writing is thinking, and I love writing. So will I fully outsource my writing to something transactional? Like, um, I need an email to send to something about something that's just like, I need to set up an appointment at the bank or something. Yeah, just drop
Yeah,
that. Like, I don't care. But if it's something like that is truly about expressing myself, my ideas, my innermost thoughts, I will collaborate with AI to help like pull out my thoughts, but that writing process has to be mine, because if it's not, I'm not earning my writing skills, I'm not continuing to develop it, and I'm not earning my thinking. And I think it's the same thing with like creativity in whatever way it's expressed, either designing a really good marketing campaign, writing the brief, writing the copy, like whatever it is, like, yes, we should be using the machines to help us in that process, to amplify our thinking, but we can't outsource the essence of what makes us us.
No, absolutely. And I think you can tell there is still you can tell when something has been created by ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. You can it's slightly more adjectival than it should be. It loves a bit of triplication. There's no keyword repetition. You can tell because the writing is perfectly formed. The trouble is that it's you can become a glutton for it, and it just produce. You say, give me 500 words on this prompt, and it'll give you 500 words. Are those is every one of those 500 words worth its weight on a piece of paper? Probably not. But you think you've done it because you've done it. I've done my prompt. I've got my 500 words. There you go, bang. And that's going to be the difference between okay marketing and great marketing is when you're able to take the framework or the content that's created by AI and then say, okay, I'm going to change it because I need it to come from my perspective or my brand's perspective or whoever it is. But I think the danger is we just think the job's done if we get a slew of copy or a slew of writing. And I'm with you. I'd like to think I've got half a foot in the writer's camp. I could write a sentence or two, and that's what I get slightly disappointed when I can see that people just haven't bothered to even change the chat GPT. They've just said, yeah, there you go. That's my submission for this campaign.
Yeah, it's all about, again, we're optimizing for scale and speed. And those used to be problems, but they're not problems anymore. In fact, as we sort of move into the third part of the Star Wars narrative, as we're applying it to this world of like narrative storytelling to, I'll call it, algorithmic mediocrity, to, you know, um, the third part where the hero appears again. One thing I've been thinking about, and this is not recent, it's for the last couple of years, is that if Mr. Ogilvy were still with us, and if anyone listening doesn't know who David Ogilvy is, one, shame on you. To go and try and grab anything you can that he has written, even his ad copy, and read it. You will be the better off for it. But I think he would be. I think he would love this moment. I obviously never met the man, so I don't know this for sure, at the risk of stating the obvious, but I think he would love this moment because he would be sitting back going, for the last 10, 15 years, you've put storytelling, true storytelling, into the back seat. And he would say, I'd like to think he would say, Nish is right. There's storytelling and then there's marketing. Marketing is the scale, it's the speed. Storytelling is the soul. It's the emotional resonance. It's the weird. It is the human. It is the things that we cannot explain, but we just have to accept about weird and wonderful human beings. And I think he would say, scale AI is going to allow us to create an even greater tsunami of commoditized crap. And he would have been in the audience of that Henry Stewart conference where you were on the panel, and it was Emily Latham, I think, who said, she was quoting some study that said 53% of people would rather watch a field of cows than another piece of marketing content. And I don't know what the study was, but it sounds pretty bang on. And there have been lots of like studies and data showing that audiences are increasingly tuning out content. And I think Mr. Ogilvy would say, what is abundant is no longer valuable. And then this goes back to what you were saying earlier. Scarcity matters, and what you and the team did at Red Bull, because you had a courageous owner, is, I think we're going back to storytelling, because it will be the lightsaber that pierces through the fog of stormtroopers and their tsunami of commoditized crap.
Absolutely. And Ogilvy is a really interesting one because if you read his books, they are, everything resonates. He was all about narrative and telling stories. And then there was an updated book where it was about digital advertising, and it was another chap at Ogilvy, and I really can't remember his name, so I apologise. But it wasn't as good. It didn't resonate as well because it was trying to almost take what David Ogilvy had said about advertising and bring it up to date. And you don't actually need to, because the principles of finding, you talk about finding the weird. His example of the Rolls Royce, the only thing you can hear when you go 60 miles an hour is the clock. That's the weird.
Yep.
And he went into great detail, and he loved the data of things. He loved the research. But what he came out with was a very simple line, but it resonated, and it resonated because he'd done his research. If you'd have put the specs of that Rolls Royce through an algorithm and said what's good about it, you would not have got that line. You would have not found that because it just doesn't have the awareness or doesn't think about the context of the driver to come up with that. So I think, yeah, Ogilvy was. You're right. He'd probably look at it and go, yeah, let's get back to what really matters, because that is going to differentiate a brand. That's what's going to take all those ones where he did, and I can't remember the shirt company with the eye patch guy, but that sort of thing. That's just it wouldn't come up. And the other one, I think, I don't know whether you had it in Canada, but there was an agency called Mother in the UK, and they did a gorilla drumming to Phil Collins in the Air Tonight. So it was a CGI gorilla. That's never going to come from Claude. It might come from a weird picture creator, but not from that idea would never come through.
Yeah, and the thing is, we're all weird, and it's I think it's beautiful when human beings can express their weirdness, right? And we want this from brands because the world is. I mean, the other thing that we've done is we've increasingly you know gathered around the campfire, not to hear stories from each other, but stories from the algorithms. And I won't go down the whole it's just manipulating everyone path. That'll be a different podcast and a different episode. But um, they should be our stories that we're telling each other, and they should be rooted in the weirdness of the brand. The funny thing about that Ogilvy Rolls Royce copy, and again, if you haven't read it, go and read it. The idea of that, I still think that copy would kill today. I think even more so today because uh, Rolls Royce, at the risk of stating the obvious, is a luxury brand, and today one of life's luxuries is silence. Um, is because
Not
we live
like
in a
that.
world that's just
Yeah,
like you're constantly surrounded by noise everywhere.
yeah,
And to be able to sit in a car and the only thing you might hear, well, it would probably be a digital clock now. I don't know. I've never sat in a Rolls, but is silence. You're right. The algorithm's not going to find that because you need a lived human experience to understand the value of that and what that means. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
No, 100%. Yeah, and I think that's why things like user generated content is an interesting one, because that has to be individual, because that's an individual perspective. And the other thing is ambassadors and influencers, the way they are used to tell stories, and that what's almost sad is that if brands look at influencers to tell their stories without assisting the influencers to tell the story in the right way. What I mean is that the influencers and ambassadors and creators have done the job of marketeers by gathering an audience, by giving proper authentic stories to that audience, and that's why they're followed. And if brands come along and go, we can get a bit of that kudos or authenticity by paying ambassador X to tell my story, it has to be authentic. The ambassador and the brand have to work together. They have to be a good fit. It's no good just saying, well, he's got 4.8 million followers on Instagram, we're going to get to them. What's the benefit of that to the brand? It's great for the content creator because they're getting a fat check, but it has to be of benefit to the brand as well. And sometimes we kind of shortcut that. Um, Conversely, there's some really good examples of ambassadors working well. I worked for a company, we sponsored the England women's cricket team, and that's cricket is quite niche. Women's cricket is
Yeah.
not as big a sport as the men's sport. So we had to find influencers who would resonate with the women's cricket audiences. But we found them, and they were brilliant because they cared about that sport. They had daughters that were playing. They played it themselves, whatever. But it's finding those right people. But it's an interesting how that has become another audience brands are desperate to get hold of.
Well, let me throw a couple of things out in response to that, and feel free to, respond to, some, all, none, totally your choice. But one is, good stories are leverage, right? Like the women's cricket team, like it's, I didn't even know women's cricket was a sport. So now I do, but story is leverage, because a really good story will spread. And that's how, like, again, going back to human history, like stories is the way that we not only created possibilities, but we would communicate with each other over vast distances as well. And there was a certain, like, value that it took time for those stories to spread. But stories are leverage. Great stories are leverage. Courageous stories are like even greater leverage. Again, going back to Red Bull. Um, Two is influencers. The What you provoked for me is this: is everybody's obsessed with influencers these days. All these influencer agencies, as I'm sure you've seen, are, getting bought up, and their valuations are increasing and things like that, because brands are going, oh, this will be authentic to, like, partner with an influencer. But the risk there is, and you use the word authentic, is if I'm a brand with, like, where storytelling is at the heartbeat of how the world understands us, how we understand ourselves, and how we operate in the world and conduct ourselves, then I think you're well positioned to work with influencers, because they themselves then will understand how to dock into your brand. Versus if you're a brand where storytelling isn't key, and you've, like, fully devolved into, transactional marketing mediocrity, like, driven by the algorithms, then you could go out and hire influencers, and it might be short-term valuable, but those influencers are basically going to think your brand is a blank canvas, and they're going to pervert it in whatever way they want.
Yeah,
But I don't know if that's a fair take on it.
it is a fair take, and I can think it. So we again at Cinch the, there was somebody in the finance department that didn't like one of the influencers that we'd used, but they were a genuine family. They bought a car. It was a really good story. And he said, I don't think the board's going to like this. And I said, but the board's not our customer. Those people are speaking directly to our customers. We have to be very careful that the content we produce is not produced for an audience of 5 on the board. It has to be for an audience, a more general audience. And where influencers work really well is when you find the right fit. And we've done it with Beta Tools. There's a guy who he worked his way from nothing to becoming a world famous car restorer. So it's quite a niche audience. It's not the biggest audience in the world, but we worked with him, and we kind of worked to give him a set of tools. And the reason he wanted the tools, it was a lovely story. He said because his dad was a mechanic, and his dad used to, if he say to him, have you got a spanner? Have you got a screwdriver? He used to give him this brand, this Beta Tools brand. And he said they were always old, but they always worked. And that showed me two things: that they had longevity, and that if my dad recommended them, that was good enough for me. So it's kind of those things. It's making sure that all those things are in place, that the ambassador is the right one. There is an authenticity to that story. It's not just a transactional, we're going to give you free tickets to go to the game, give us a good review. We're going to give you a free set of stuff. Please put something on your channel, because that devalues both the influencer themselves and also the brand. It can't work as a long term, and the audiences will eventually just get bored of people saying, I've got some new free stuff. So it's an interesting one, because brands love it because it's instant access.
Yeah.
The creators love it because it's instant money, but we have to be careful that it's done for the right reasons.
Yeah, very careful. And I think when storytelling is your storytelling quotient is high or strong, then I think you're in a better position to create that leverage through influencers. I just sort of want to go just thinking about women's cricket again and Red Bull and what you shared today. I refer to like storytelling as leverage. Is it leverage? Is it strategy? Or is storytelling actually the product of the company? Because I think about Red Bull especially.
Yeah,
Uh, like the the owner had actually, if I understand this the story correctly, had bought like the drink from somebody else. Um, and while I've had my share of Red Bull in my earlier years, not so much in the last 10, 15, but it's I mean, it tastes like what it tastes like, right? But I
yeah,
even think back to my own experience. Like I was buying the story of like, I'm on the go entrepreneur working 16, 18 hours days. I'm going to get this energy boost from it. Maybe I did. I don't know. I wasn't like doing A/B tests or anything like that. So is storytelling the product or is it a strategy?
I think that depends on the brand because I
Yep.
think Red Bull has made an absolute. It is its strategy, and arguably, and I've read lots of. There are lots of people who comment on Red Bull online, and they say arguably it's not a drinks company; it's a media company. It's both, and they are symbiotic because if you didn't have the drink, you couldn't have the marketing department. If you didn't have the marketing department, the drink wouldn't be as prevalent and as bought in as many numbers as it is. But again, it goes back to we story was just drilled into us, narrative, narrative, narrative. Whether it was a social media caption on Twitter as was, whether it was a Facebook post, whether it was a campaign, whether it was buying a football club, you had to have a reason, a story behind it, or a story to tell once you got that entity. And that's why, if you look at all the athletes that they have, their roster of athletes, they're not only brilliant, they've also got a really good backstory as well. Everyone has a good backstory, so it doesn't matter who you are. You will find something within your past that will give you context and give you some of that leverage that you talked about. But what they do is they find the story behind those athletes, and that's what was great to work in that because you didn't have to. They didn't have to be. They bought. They've just invested in a football team in the UK, a team called Leeds United. They're not the best team in the country, but what they've done is they will now start to use that to tell Red Bull story through the football team and tell the football team story to Red Bull's audiences as well. But it'll be an interesting one. Um,
So as we wrap up here, I think we're in the return of the Jedi phase. I talked about, what Mr. Ogilvy's take might be on it. What's your take on it? Are we just going to do you think we're just going to use automation and AI and the algorithms of the digital platforms to become increasingly commoditized and we'll live in sort of this grayish world? Or do you think the storyteller's back and we'll be in the driver's seat, chugging a jumbo can of Red Bull and just like putting pedal to the metal and like smashing through that wall of just again commoditized crap, content crap, and great stories will live yet again?
yeah, I mean, arguably, they never went away. I mean, arguably that there was always the Rebel Alliance was always on a planet somewhere, just kind of telling great stories. I think what and you can see how you can see when whether it was digital, whether it was social, there's a spike in kind of earlier adopters, but then I've always called it the early adapters, where you can see what's happening. It's you become the VHS and the Betamax, and you look at what's coming and you go, okay, I'm not going to do it now, but I can see what's happening, and I think storytelling has always been there. It's as you've said, is part of human nature. Whether you look at history, religion, philosophy, psychology, it is all about that narrative, which either goes on in your head or someone's talking to you about around a campfire. It will always be there. What AI and what the mediocrity of content is going to do is there will be a differentiation between those people who can honestly judge what's going to be a great smash in the face story, and it'll just take you, it'll really resonate, to just a load of grey kind of content that anyone could have produced and anyone did produce using generative AI. So I think it's going to be there will be victory for storytellers. I'm just not sure they've ever gone away, but we just have to make sure that it's promoted in the right way. It's seen as a long-term strategy for marketeers and for brands. It's not going to be tomorrow that it resonates. Red Bull took a long time to get that story going. You know, it was from, God, what was it, the early 90s. You know, so it took a long time, but they got it right. They definitely got it right. Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely did. Well, David Granger from Arc and Foundry, on that note, thank you so much for joining me today. We'll have to come back and do this again. There's so many other things we could dig into, and storytelling is something I'm going to, continue to talk about. I think it's important for, whether you're working external to brands as an advisor to them, or you're inside a brand, or you're a creative operations leader. I think part of your remit has to be thinking about and um, designing for creating the space for great storytelling to come forward. Because if you're not, then I think a brand without a story is a brand without a heartbeat, and you might be able to stay on algorithmic life support for a while. I'm really beating this metaphor to death.
I'm waiting for Ozempic to come back in.
Exactly, exactly. You might be able to, live on the algorithms for a while as life support, but eventually it'll peter out, because that's a race to the bottom.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed for having me, though, Nish. It's been really good.
It's been
Thank you.
fantastic.